Okay, everybody, welcome. This course is basically the second portion of the CTE pathway for the protective pathways in law enforcement. And so your first one class you should have done, or you may go back and take that one, I don't know, was Introduction to Criminal Justice. And this class is going to be on corrections. So we're going to take a deep dive a little bit more into the corrections portion of law enforcement. We did have our last unit, if you remember, if you took the Introduction to Criminal Justice, our last one was like a brief introduction on corrections and how that kind of goes there. So that's an introduction. Just so you know, this lesson is being recorded for learning purposes. As we are going through the Nearpod and stuff, let me put the Nearpod link one more time in the chat for those that haven't been able to get it yet. Make sure you're following along with the Nearpod lesson. You're using the chat tools respectfully and appropriately, and then you're responding to questions and instructions the first time. Okay, well, for those that are new, this is a little bit about me. So my name is Mr. Hancock. This is my wife, Christy, right here, picture. And then I have my 3 kids, Brooklyn, who is now 10, Kason, who's 7, and Kaylor, who is 5. And so that's my little family right there. That's a little bit about me. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go over the history of law so we can kind of understand a little bit better. And then we're going to go in other units, we're going to go deeper into it. But let me jump over to the course so you can see what's going on. So course announcements. This is a new class that I'm teaching. I used to be teaching criminal law, but they've changed the pathway of how it works. So it's going to be corrections. So that's why we hit, I'm still kind of developing it as we go. But anyways, the video will come up on the course announcements. I'll just post that right here about 24 hours after, for those that have missed it. If we jump into our calendar real quick, we see today is the 3rd. We'll have live classes every Thursday, except if it doesn't say. We have the live class Thursday, and then whatever the assignment is or assignments, they'll be due on the Wednesday coming up, okay? So this one will be due on the 9th, and then I'll zero out grades, and so we'll kind of work through that. And we'll have a live class again. We have some breaks coming up. So Thanksgiving break is coming up right here, the 23rd to the 25th. Then we'll kind of come into here. We'll have winter break, which is fairly long, and then the end of the block ends on Thursday the 12th. As you see, the last things should actually be due around the 14th or so. So if you keep pace, you should have everything done before winter break, and you'll have a extended winter break, at least in this class. So today what we're going to be doing, don't look at these ones. You can't see them anyways, but they'll be changing. But the first unit, what we're going to talk about is the history of law. We will have a quiz that is associated with that, and we'll be going over the quiz at the very end. There's 10 questions. And so these quizzes in the past have been fairly hard for some students. So I'm going to give you some helpful hints if you stick around at the end of class, and we'll go through all of them and just make sure your mind is where it needs to be as we're in here. So that's the benefit of coming to class. Okay, so what the objective is in class today. So given a quiz in the OLS, students will accurately answer choice questions about the history of law and changes throughout time with 80% accuracy across one trial. So the history in law in the United States, because law is the aspect of human society, it is always shaped by the history of society in which it's developed. So we have very Judeo-Christian kind of laws that are on the books, right? And if you don't follow that concept, you could go into the correction system, right? We know that law in the United States was influenced by the system of English common law in Europe and the signing of the U.S. Constitution, which outlines the functions and structures of the United States government. But what other historical developments have impacted U.S. law? So we're going to talk about some of those other ones. So some big vocabulary you're going to need to know, probably for your quiz, some of the things, is one, amendment. Okay, an amendment is a change to the U.S. Constitution. Okay, and it's interesting. So I just had my ballot come to me for I'm voting. So each state has their own state constitution as well, and they have different amendments on there. Okay, and so there was an amendment that you voted for, yes or no. But that's a change to the U.S. Constitution is what we're looking for. So this is very important when we all come from different points of view and different backgrounds. And it's an unfair tendency to favor one side of an argument over another. And we all have biases, and we just got to keep mindful of that. Hey, we probably think a certain way because of the way we grew up, right? Our learning history, if you will. Okay. The next one is the Bill of Rights. It's the first 10 amendments of the U.S. Constitution is what we call the Bill of Rights. Then we have something called the Doctrine of Preemption. Sorry. It's the idea that gives federal law supremacy over state laws in the case of where the two are conflicting. Okay. So you think of this way. So the United States government and Constitution goes over the whole entire United States, and the state governments go under it. So if you have like Utah underneath here, the U.S. Constitution and the U.S. laws trumps whatever laws are made in the state. Okay, so that's the doctrine of preemption. Okay, so basically, the state of Utah cannot make a law that contradicts the federal law, and if it does, the federal law is superior to it. Okay, another one that we're going to talk about a little bit is women's suffrage. It's the historical movement that culminated in the ratification of the 19th Amendment. Okay, that might be very helpful if you remember that. Okay, especially for your quiz. Okay, so for those that are on the Nearpod, what I want you to do is I want you to take a second here and just and pull these over to where they go. So I'll do like maybe the first couple with you here. A change in the Constitution is, what do you guys think? Why don't you put it in the chat? For those that are not filling in the blank on there, why don't you put it in the chat? What's the first one? A change to the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution. What's that called? Anyone? Okay, that is an amendment. Okay. An unfair tendency to side with one over another. Right, we talked about that. That is biases. The first 10 amendments of the U.S. Constitution is the Bill of, hopefully I got the right of rights. Okay, the next one is the idea that the federal government gets supremacy over state governments that are in conflict. Doctrine of preemption. And then the last one, the 19th Amendment was ratified. It was there. So let me see it. 10 out of 10. There we go. Very good. Okay, let's watch a little bit of video about how this all works.
What is law? As students of the law, when we want to define a particular legal term, there are a few sources we can legitimately look to. As with other subjects, let's start with the dictionary. When we want to define a legal term, we will look to Black's Law Dictionary. This is an important tool for attorneys and law students. This dictionary serves as the leading standard authority for defining legal terms and has been published since 1891. Black's defines law as that which is laid down, ordained, or established. It's important to note that although Black's Law Dictionary is a helpful tool, it is not itself law. The United States Supreme Court plays the final controlling role in defining legal terms. Through the case of United States Fidelity and Guarantee Company versus Gunther, the Supreme Court states that law, in its generic sense, is a body of rules of action or conduct prescribed by controlling authority and having binding legal force. This is a reliable and thorough definition of the law, but there are many accepted definitions for what constitutes law. Generally speaking, laws are rules that the people in a society believe are important enough for the society to enforce. Law comes from an organized government, but our laws are designed so that they typically reflect what the majority of the people feel is just or right. People make law, and it is made to reflect how the people feel about certain actions or conduct, such as murder, stealing, or cheating on taxes. There is a purposeful and strong connection between law and that society's morality. This is a theme you will see often in business law and also throughout all other areas of the law. So where does law come from? In America, our law system came from Great Britain. The settlers of the original 13 colonies came from Europe, and they brought with them their own set of rules and principles to be used in their new society. The English common law was the system of law in England at that time and was quickly adopted throughout the colonies. The English common law is rooted in centuries of English history. Much of the common law was formed in the years between the Norman conquest of England in the early 11th century and the settlement of the American colonies in the early 17th century. The English common law is based on a cultural system of settling disputes through local custom. The early tribes of England each held their own set of customs, but this system became increasingly formalized as those early tribal peoples came together and organized. These ancient customs are the basic principles that eventually became part of the American system of justice. Under English common law, disputes between two parties were handled on a case-by-case basis. However, the decision-maker did not act without guidance. The decision-maker was required to look to similar, previously decided cases and use those established guidelines and traditions. The customs of England were built upon and expanded for centuries, all through court decisions. By carrying forward and preserving these customs, the courts assured that the law was truly common to all. For example, imagine that Smith and Jones own land adjacent to one another. Smith intends to build a barn on his own land, near his border with Jones. However, Smith inadvertently builds his barn on Jones's land. Jones claims ownership of the barn, and the two end up arguing their positions in court. Let's say the court decides that Smith owns the barn that he built, and he now also owns that small portion of land that the barn occupies. This would now be the rule to be applied for all of those cases coming after Smith and Jones. From that moment forward, all landowners must be careful not to allow others to build permanent fixtures on their land. Otherwise, the rule now states, they could lose ownership of that portion of their land. Scenarios like this created a gradual development of an extensive system of laws, even though these rules were mostly unwritten at that time. Shortly before the American Revolution in the last half of the 18th century, Sir William Blackstone published Commentaries on the Laws of England as a complete overview of the English common law.
All right, so we'll stop there. So there's a lot that kind of goes into, as you can see, kind of law and how it's structured. I thought it was interesting with the Smith and Jones that, once a decision has been made by the courts, that becomes what's called case law, and other judges look to case law in order to make their rulings. So things that have happened in the past. So it just kind of builds on top of one another, and the law gets very kind of complicated there. So Let's talk about amendments real quick. So one way we can understand the evolution of law in the United States is to examine how the Constitution has changed over the years. The process of changing the Constitution is long and arduous, but when it's successful, an amendment or change is added to the Constitution. For example, as the Constitution was in the process of being ratified by 13 colonies, the framers added 10 amendments to the document. These 10 amendments are known as the Bill of Rights. So they felt that the Constitution didn't go far enough to protect ourselves. So they added the Bill of Rights, the 10 ones, and now we have multiple other amendments after that as well. Okay, so thinking about that, you guys, what is something that you think should be added to the law? Is there something that you guys think should be added, or maybe even taken away, something like that? So what should be added? And usually these things are to protect ourselves. And let's just say there's a lot of laws out there, and we break many of them. Okay, let's get your thoughts. All right, so somebody put on the chat out there, they said they think gun laws need to be a bit more strict in who can own them. Okay, talking about maybe getting a psychological evaluation in order to do it. Okay, so which would be interesting because we do have the Second Amendment talks about the right to bear arms, right? So you'd have to almost get a constitutional amendment or something like that. Or he said raise the limit of getting a rifle up to 21. Okay, very good, interesting. Good. Somebody put on the chat free healthcare. Okay, so maybe make that, and that's been widely debated, thinking that maybe should be an inalienable right, that we should be able to care for everybody that needs it. Yeah, and I see, I mean, there's kind of both sides to it. Healthcare is very expensive, but on the other side, I have, somebody that I know that didn't have health insurance and recently, and they got hit by a car, and they've had so many medical bills they're going to be living with the rest of their life, right? So there's a lot to it, yeah. Somebody said that if you're a veteran, you should get free housing. Okay. Yeah, that's another thing. I mean, other countries, not just if you're a veteran, so that's very specific, but they believe that nobody should be without basically a roof on their head, right? And so they've provided housing for a lot of people, okay? Free housing for those with life-changing disabilities, okay? Interesting. Tougher laws for criminals. Yeah, that's an interesting one, especially when we're going to be talking a lot more about criminals in this class when we talk about corrections, and like, what's your definition of a criminal, right? What does it, as I said before, all of us break the law at some point in time, right? And so it's hard to say it, but we are already, the United States has the most inmates or people in prison than anybody in the world, right? So yeah, just thoughts I'm throwing out here, okay? I'm not trying to play one side or the other. The other one, stricter rules for drunk driving, okay? Deeper investigation when it comes to murder, okay? So being able to have, in the Constitution, it protects you. There's a lot of people that actually get multiple appeals for their case. All right, we have somebody here on the chat said vet housing seems like might causing problems down the line, like create a caste system. Okay. Someone that commits crimes against humanity is maybe a tougher, that what you're thinking. An actual criminal is someone that actively hurts humans in some form. Okay. Now you got to say in some form, right? I mean, what if there's like mentally it hurts somebody, but you know what I mean? Like it wasn't physical harm, maybe it was mental harm, but then it's like, okay, how far is mental harm, right? If they were able to, if somebody yelled at somebody, right, and then they became like that, now they have some anxiety, right, like that. Are we going to criminalize people for yelling at people, right? Kind of see where I'm coming from. So
It seems a bit extreme.
that's a bit extreme. Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
I mean more, serious, physical or mental harm, rather than something as simple as an outburst.
Yeah, and so we gotta so that's why you'd have to put in the law like the exact severity. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
you have to be a bit more specific about it. Yeah, that is true.
Yeah,
I'm not used to having to specify to that level.
yeah.
When I'm talking about things like that, I'll have to try and keep that in mind.
No, perfect. Hey, I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting. But that's what you do in law, right? Is we just dig down farther and farther. Well, what about this, right? How can we clarify this? Go down more and more. Okay. Um, let's see here. Actual sentences for murders caused by DUIs. Okay. Um, animal cruelty needs to be taken more seriously. Okay. Very good.
The problem with animal cruelty is that animals are quite literally seen as animals. They're not worth as much. Their lives aren't worth as much as a human or so on. That's it's quite literally. I don't know exactly why it's that way. I don't know the historical and importance and all that, but I do know that I do know that there's not much we can do about that because there's quite literally with animals it's seen as lower at times by some people because there's quite literally. I don't know if there's a saying specifically for it, but but some people do think that you can't be lower than an animal or something
Mhm.
along those lines. It's one of the things that take decades of trying to actively work against people's preconceived notions. Like it took a good couple years to start working off people's perceptions of women. But
Mhm.
now we have a problem of women feeling like feeling like they're entitled to things, and that there's a patriarchy and all that jazz. Now we have that problem rather than not knowing enough rights.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I mean, that's where I think at the beginning of this class, right, we talked about bias, right?
Yeah,
And,
personal bias. We
yeah,
all have our own personal opinions. We see things a certain way. We all see things through we see things tinted through the way we've experienced reality. So with this again, I can understand to some degree that some people are more prone to believing like the patriarchy is at fault. I'm personally more prone to negativity or pessimistic viewpoints, but it's one of the things where you just have to try and learn when you're being too pessimistic or so on. And I feel like and of course I'm pointing out the radical, the radical people. I'm primarily pointing out the radical people in this situation. There are people that are perfectly, fine, normal. They don't have the similar problem with the patriarchy. I just tend to find that argument incredibly annoying, and to be something that you can't do much about because society until around until around the women's suffrage movement, like the 1920s, I believe, women's place was thought to be at home. It was only around then, or at least that's when it became mainstream. I think my history is under God, but it only came, actually important to people around then that women weren't getting enough rights.
Mhm.
And that's how many years of human history that you have to swig off?
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to get everybody's opinions and point of views and stuff like that. And so that's why these issues are so complicated, right? And it's like how do we judge, who should face what? But yeah, I think we got some really good points of view and strong views. Let me just go over a couple more. CPS workers listen to people who actually need help. Okay. Blowing off comments from kids that should be taken seriously. Yeah, I definitely think there's all kinds of really good
that is a problem to my knowledge. So that it says the CPS being hit and miss about children, because if they don't, if there's something that they just feel isn't right, but the place is perfectly fine and all that jazz.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Healthcare, talking about women's healthcare, talking about abortion.
I'm
That's
not
a big
confused
topic.
on what that means. I'm like, are they saying abortions themselves should be legal or what? Because I have to agree. I honestly can't say that we have the right to actively say a woman can't do something with their own body. That's backsliding to some degree in terms of women's rights. I have to agree there. It's one of the things that really it's hit or miss, because it depends on your viewpoint. I do believe that some Christians, some people that follow the Abrahamic, religion, that is the primary form of religion in the world nowadays, I do believe. Christianity, Mormonism, and so on. Don't believe that it's really something you should do, but some religions wouldn't mind it, some might or not. It really depends. I on it like the North. I know that they prefer to go out and battle. I don't know how they think, how they see something like abortions. Nor do I know how the Greeks would, because again, I'm not. If I had to choose a religion I follow, it'd be Mormonism. I personally prefer to these things more. They could all be true. Because there's quite literally no knowing what religion may have been true at one point or not. They could have all been true at one point, but faded out.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. We appreciate it. All right, so we're going to move on a little bit here. So we did talk about a little bit about women's suffrage, right? And so that's something that you'll be answering some questions in the quiz. But here's kind of a timeline that kind of goes through about how laws kind of change over times and people's perspectives change. And so the laws will change over time too, right? And so some of these big things we feel very important about and everything like that, we can continue to look at. So like it all started probably even before this, but in 1948, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and her colleague organized the first right convention. And the amendment to grant women voting rights in the Senate, it was in 1868. 1882, the Senate creates a select committee for women's suffrage. In 1912, 9 states passed laws allowing women to vote. In 1920, the 19th Amendment was passed to allow women to vote. But there's still, like, even today, a discrepancy between the two. Okay. All right. Okay, so our current culture, it really kind of has changed things. So we're in 1993. So this is kind of interesting. So things are changing to more help people, things like that. You have the Family Medical and Leave Act, where basically when a woman gives birth, she can go in and then she gets medical leave. Before, it wasn't really kind of allowed. It's like, well, you got to be back at work or you can get fired. So this protects them from not losing their job. They have now extended that to like partners and stuff like that. So I would get some leave as well if my wife were to have another baby. So I think these kind of things are constantly changing, and rules are being kind of made in this way. Okay, so that leads us to the end of what we're going to talk about today. But I want to go over those questions on the quiz because they can get kind of tricky. Okay, so, oops, I better log back in real quick. So in Canada, my parents get a month off for babies. Yep. And some companies too are following that. Very good. Okay. So the first question here, okay, it talks about The constitutional amendment that it is attributed, we talked about that quite a bit, right? So you should be able to get this one pretty easily. The next one, question 2, imagine that a movement began to allow voting federal elections people as young as 17. What would the expansion be of? Okay. So this one may be a little tricky, but we kind of talked about it, but it's really close to like the women's blank movement. Okay. So that should give you some hints there. All right. The next one here says slavery was outlawed in the United States by the passage of the Bill of Rights. Was that true or false, right? Now remember, the Bill of Rights was created at the inception of the United States. And so when did the Civil War happen? So that's just kind of a timeline one for you, okay? All right. Next one, it says, which concept in the history inquiry is the most relevant to creating modern laws that serve all citizens, not just the most powerful and influential? Okay. So this is something we didn't talk too much about. Okay. But I would Google some of these questions, right? The doctrine and presumption, that wouldn't be it because that's like the federal being over there. Suffrage would not be it. So it's based down to autobiography or historiography. So look at both of those two answers and see which one you think is right. Okay. The next one here, what does Siena Falls hold in the American legal history? Okay. So if you remember, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, right, and her friend went to this place, and so it was the beginning of the what? Okay. Next one, number 6. When historians discuss changes in the American Constitution over the years, what is the phrase that they use? Okay. So that one there is they're changing the Constitution, right? We had a definition on that. Which one talks about changing of the Constitution? Okay, number 7. Number 7 says, what is the best summary of the status of payment of paid maternity leave policy in the United States? Okay, so we have here, we talked about the United States, right? Maybe the law makes it available, but the United States is not as good as maybe some of the other countries compared to that, right? We had our comment about Canada. So look in here, that would be good, okay? Number 8, which of the following statements about the U.S. Constitution is most accurate? Okay. So as we're kind of looking through these, what is it hard or is it not hard for the Constitution to change? Okay. So that's what it's asking. Okay. And we only have like not very many amendments. So it's probably fairly difficult, right? Okay. Number 9, why is it important to understand historical research in conducting in a course like on law? Okay. And we talked about this at the beginning, what shaped it, right? It's shaped by its history. So look for that answer there. And then the last one is there was an attempt in the first 1923 and the ratifying by the 35 states in 1977 to ensure into the Constitution a statement that there will be no legal distinction between men and women. Gender could not be considered in terms of divorce, property, employment, etc. Knowing the language of the Constitution, what is this attempted name? Okay, so it would. We talked about suffrage, but that's the movement. But it's going to be more in regards to equality. Okay. So that gives you some very helpful hints on there. So somebody said, when is it due? It's due next Wednesday. Okay. All right. Let me kind of look at the comments here. I'm going to stop the recording, but if you do need help or whatever, come here. You can ask questions, whatever, but I'll stay after for a while to answer anything. Thanks, guys.